Hey, in this video I wanted to talk a wee bit more about the SP-202. If you're not familiar with SP-202, it's one of Roland's SP hardware sampler range. You can still get the SP-404, I'm pretty sure they still make them. They're at least still being sold in shops as new. But this was one of the oldest, if not the oldest, of that range, and it came out in 1998, I believe. It's a bit of a quirky device, and if you're interested in it in general, I've done a whole video where I've talked about why it's quite a cool thing and why people still like them and use them, and there'll be a link somewhere. Today though, I wanted to talk about a very particular facet of this device which bears a bit more examination than I was able to do in previous videos, and that is the memory card situation. The SP-202 has its own internal memory. However, if you want to expand the functionality of the device, then it takes what is called a smart media card. You may be familiar with smart media cards. I realised when I saw them again for the first time, when I saw them again, I realised that actually I had smart media cards in some of my earliest digital cameras. However, what is less commonly known is that smart media came out in 1995. So it was kind of around the time of this. They weren't like old technology at that point, but they were designed by Toshiba, came out in 1995. But they then had like a redesign later on, and so whilst the original cards operated on 5 volts, the newer cards operate on 3.3 volts. So even though you can find loads of smart media cards kicking about on eBay, most of them, if not all of them, won't work with this device, and hence lies the problem. As mentioned, there is internal memory in this, so you don't need the memory card to use the device, especially because it's limited anyway, but the memory card comes with its own limitations, and that's one of the reasons that if you watch online people say that they haven't bothered to get one of these, is that whilst you can only apply a certain number of effects to each sample on the unit itself, if you use the memory card, you can't actually apply most of the effects anyway if you're applying them to samples on the card. For example, you can't reverse a sample that's on the memory card, you can't apply time stretch, you can't apply a delay, and you also can't apply the filter or the ring modulator to stereo samples that are recorded on the card, which is, you know, an interesting limitation to an already limited device. With those limitations in mind, why would you want a memory card for this? Well, the stock memory in this is very limited. So if you're recording at the highest quality setting, which I think is like 33 kilohertz for what it's worth, you only get 32 seconds of sample time in mono, which isn't a lot. And so what most people do when they're using this is they downsample everything to either standard by default, or they drop even further down. And that's pretty cool. It does give, you know, jams made in this thing quite an interesting character, because they do sound quite nice as you use the more lo-fi sample rates. But sometimes you don't want that. Sometimes you want something at a higher quality sample rate to cut through a mix, especially if we're talking about drums or something, and that's something that I've found with this. Sometimes you want a wee bit of clarity in amongst the fuzz. If you get a memory card, then it takes the sample time from 32 seconds at the highest rate in mono up to something like 4.5 minutes, which is 4 extra minutes, which is a crazy amount more sample time in this wee box. So you can see why people might want to get one. Obviously, the sample time increases even further if you're using it at lower rates. So if you go down to standard, I think you get like 8 minutes sample time or something like that. So the main reason that you get one of these memory cards is the sample time, because it gives you way more room. The other benefit of the memory card is that you get access to more samples themselves, or at least spaces for samples. So in this you have 8 pads, and you have 2 banks, A and B. That's with internal memory. If you use a memory card, then you have an extra 2 banks, so you basically get double the amount of samples that you can store, which is quite a lot for this. It makes a difference. The big problem with the memory card, as I've mentioned, is that it's a different format to the vast majority of cards you're going to find for sale on eBay, and because people have realised that these are quite hard to find, then sellers, if they know what they are, start charging crazy amounts of money. A few years ago they might have been like 30 quid, 40 quid, and to be honest, that's about the limit for what I would pay for one of these things. But now you're seeing people who are deliberately taking advantage of the market, and they're selling them for like 130, 140 pounds, which is just mental. Crazy prices for the functionality you get. Both these reasons mean that most people that you see online talking about the SP-202 don't bother getting a card or haven't been able to find a card. When it comes to the cost of these, I can completely understand that. As I said, I wouldn't pay more than about 30 quid for the card itself, because it seems ludicrous to pay almost half or more than half of what this device cost to get a memory card to make it work a wee bit better. I don't have as much sympathy for the kind of reasoning around the effects limitations, because to be honest, the device in itself is so limited anyway that you can't actually simultaneously use multiple effects anyway. And so really, if you're using a limited device like this in the first place, you're not expecting it to operate like a fully featured modern hardware sampler. So to me, the fact that you can't apply a delay and stuff to the samples that are on the memory card isn't as big a deal. The sample time increase with the memory card alone would be worth it for me, if you could find one at a good price. Now, since I'm a completionist in certain facets of life or certain areas of life, I decided that I wanted to find one of these cards, and so I thought it couldn't be that hard. There must be a way, because there's all these cards kicking about that people don't realise what they are, or that they're valuable to somebody else, or that they would have a purpose for somebody else. And so I'm sure plenty of people have these sitting about their house and don't realise, you know, sitting in an old camera or something. And so there's a bunch of different ways I looked at to try and find one, or to try and get some more memory time into this, and I thought they were worth sharing because I learned a few things along the way. My first tip, if you're looking for one of these cards, is not to search for Smart Media 5 volts. If you search for Smart Media card 5 volts on eBay, all you're going to get are people that know what the 5 volt is, and if they know what the 5 volt card is, they'll know to look at the prices, and they accordingly jack up their prices to kind of crazy heights because they think they can get away with charging anything they want for them. And unfortunately, some people do pay it. So the second tip is related to that, and that is that when I was looking, I started looking just for 2 megabyte Smart Media cards or 4 megabyte Smart Media cards, and that's because the limit of the old 5 volt cards was 2 megabyte or 4 megabyte. And so if you're looking up the different cards, then if you search for 2 meg or 4 meg, you're more likely to find the specific kind of card you need without the person realising it's a 5 volt card and realising that, you know, they might be able to get away with charging ludicrous rates on eBay. This is kind of linked to the idea that people will have these lying about. So if you don't include the 5 volt bit and you kind of look at the card yourself and try and identify the type of card from the pictures in the listing, then you've got more chance of finding one for a really good price. The third tip relates to the physical shape of the card. Now, this isn't something that was obvious to me at first, and I didn't see this really listed anywhere until I looked in the manual for the SP-202, and that is that the card shape for the 5 volt version is different from the 3.3 volt version, and so you can identify really quickly if you look at a listing whether a card is a 5 volt version or a 3.3 volt version. And this is helpful because a lot of the time sellers just include photos of the front or, you know, the back, and it doesn't have the information you need on the card. So you kind of have to either message them and say, hey, can you tell me what the card says on the other side? Or you can have to try and read the listing and take a chance, and that's not worth it. If you realise that the shape of the card is a wee bit different, you can look at the picture and go, oh no, that's not one, that's not one, that's not one. And so if you combine these together, you know, so only search for 4 meg cards at a maximum, look for the ones that have the different shape, then you're already a few steps ahead and being much more efficient with your searching. When I say the physical shape of the card is different, the shape isn't different necessarily, but the design of the shape is, if this makes sense. To demonstrate this, what I'll do is explain another option which I thought might work and then realised wouldn't because of the shape of the card, and that is the XD to SMC card adapter. This is something that if you look up solutions for using Smart Media cards with the old Boss samplers, you can find a lot of talk about the XD to SMC card converters. And basically these are just something like this, which is Smart Media card adapter at the top and a wee XD port at the bottom. And XD cards were another type of old memory card, and they look kind of like that, a wee tiny thing. Again, I had one of these in an old camera lying around. But the gist is you put the XD card into the bottom of the adapter like that, and then you plug that into your SP. The 303 and the 505 maybe, I think, in the SP range work with these as far as I can tell. I don't have one, so I can't confirm it. But I thought I'd try my luck with this in the SP-202. When I was looking in these old forum posts, there were some discussions about using these, and there wasn't anything specific about using them with SP-202. There was just conversation about how they wouldn't read partitions. So basically the idea being that XD cards came at a minimum of 16 megs because they weren't as old as the smart media cards. So because the SP-202 only supports 4 meg at maximum, then, you know, by its nature, surely you couldn't use these cards. And of course, what you can do is partition the card. So you can split the card into chunks if you go on and format it in your computer. So you could split a 16 meg card into four 4 meg, not 4 gig, 4 meg portions. And you know, in theory, that would mean that the SP would be able to read it. All of the discussions that I saw said that this wouldn't work because the SPs can't read partitions. And to me, that seemed like a bit of a flawed reasoning, because even if they can't read partition tables, there must be a way to partition it in such a way that there is only a single partition on there. And I've spent a lot of time working in the technological world, and so I understood a wee bit about this, and I thought, right, I'm going to get one and try it, because if the only issue is the partitioning and the inability of the device to read partitions, then I should be able to get around that by some clever boot record hacking or whatever. So I got it, I got the card, and I got the XD card adapter thing, and I plugged it in, and I partitioned it, and it looked fine. I basically made it look like this was a 4 meg card, not a 16 meg card with partitions. However, my SP-202 wouldn't read it, and I couldn't work out why. And then I saw in the manual that it says to put the contacts down. So whilst you would think the metal contacts go up, they actually have to go down. And then I realised that actually the design of these is different for the 3.3 volt versions. So if you look at the adapter, you can hopefully see there's a notch on the top right hand side. Whereas on the 5 volt card, which I happen to have one here, it has the notch on the opposite side. So you can see, and maybe I'll flash up an image of this so it's a bit clearer than my camera. So you can see there is a difference, and this means that they mount differently as well, or they get inserted differently as well. So the cards are physically different, and that's my top tip, because that doesn't seem to be anywhere in any of these videos or forum posts. And if you know that, then it becomes way easier to identify these cards on kind of obscure eBay listings. My fourth tip, or maybe the fifth tip, I've lost track, I should have written these down, if you're looking for one of these elusive cards, is, as I mentioned earlier, these were used in early digital cameras, and so there are lists of cameras online that you can find that made use of the 5 volt style cards. And so if you if you search on eBay for these digital cameras, then you're basically hoping that somebody's seen an old dusty camera lying around their house, decided to stick it on eBay and see what they can get, and that the memory card will be included. This was my biggest hope for finding one of the cards, because I thought, well, people aren't going to be thinking about the memory card, they're just going to stick it up and be happy if they get like a tenner for their old crappy camera. However, it became a bit of a faff, because the cameras in question are really old and really crap, and so people are not going to be thinking that they'll get any money for them. They'll barely be worth the postage a lot of the time, and so you end up having to go through this big list of cameras, and it wasn't bringing up a huge amount of results. When it did bring up results, there wasn't any memory cards in them. The few times that there were memory cards in the cameras with the listing, I contacted the sellers, because there weren't pictures of the memory card, of course, and no, they were all 3.3 volt. So I still think there is some benefit to this tactic if you're determined to get a card and don't mind putting in a bit of a slog to check eBay every day. And I guess you could set up alerts or something, but the list of cameras is, you know, is enough that it would be annoying if you're getting like 15 emails a day about an update to an old cover for a terrible camera. But this is one tactic you could use, and it's probably one of the better ones. You should be aware though that the forum post that lists the cameras that used to use these cards is probably been quite popular, and so this is something that lots of people do. My dog is interrupting my audio again. As you probably noticed, I do have one of the 5V cards, and so you might be wondering how I actually got one of them in the end, and that leads me on to my last tip if you're searching for one of these cards. And unfortunately, it's probably one of the least helpful or the most obvious of the tips, but unfortunately it also is probably the best way to find one of them at this point, and that is, I've got my SP-202 here, and I ended up with two SP-202s. This was not really what I intended to end up doing, but it turned out that the only real way I could find one of these memory cards was to find one included with another SP-202, and so I decided to wait until I could find one for a decent price with the memory card included, and then I would sell the duplicate one later on. So for now, I've got two of these, and I'm going to make some videos with two of them, I think, but ultimately I definitely cannot justify having two of these devices, so one of them will be going on eBay, minus the memory card, of course. To be serious for a minute though, I have spent a not insignificant amount of time looking into these cards. I've spent a lot of time in forums, I have spent a lot of time setting up eBay alerts, looking for old digital cameras, messaging individual sellers to ask them what certain cards say because they haven't uploaded pictures, trying out these old adapters to see if they would work, and faffing about with partitions and all the rest of it. And unfortunately, the best way I found in the end to get a card was to buy a second unit. Obviously, this approach is going to make more sense if you don't have an SP-202 yet, because you can just keep your eye out for a sale that includes the card. But if you have one and you're really desperate to get a card as well, then it's also a decent thing to look out for, because they do come up, and often what you find is that people have found these devices in their garage or their attic or somebody's house, and they just want to get rid of them, and they can't really be arsed separating things out, and so you're able to get them for a good price and not have to deal with all the hassle of searching every day and, you know, paying the ludicrously inflated prices of eBay for the cards on their own. I think I paid, I can't remember the exact figure, but I definitely paid more than the SP-202 on its own would have been worth. My original SP-202 I got from Japan, and I think I paid about £230 all in with customs tax and postage and all the rest of it. And the unit I got with a card in it, I think I paid about 250, 260, something like that. And so I definitely paid more than I would have paid for the unit on its own in the condition it was in, but I got the card for I think about 30, 40 quid in the grand scheme of things. So it depends how much you're interested in the card, really. That's me for now. That was a very specific topic, but hopefully it was useful to some people, because as I said, when I was looking through these things, a lot of the information is really old. It wasn't obvious to me at all that these cards were physically a different shape until I got them in my hands. And to be honest, it wasn't obvious either that you couldn't use these adapters until I got one, because I thought I'd be smart, you know, and partition it myself and everything. But you can't. Let me tell you, you can't partition these for the SP-202. Definitively can't be done, because they don't fit. They don't fucking fit in the slot. I am going to have to sell one of these at some point, because having two of these units is fucking ridiculous, and there's literally no need for anybody to have two of them. However, I'm not going to sell them yet, because I think it'd be cool to try them out in a few videos and chain them together and see if I can do some cool things with double SP-202 action. But yeah, eventually they'll be gone. Anyway, hopefully this was helpful to somebody, and if you do know of anything else about these cards, I'd be really interested to know, because it's become a wee bit of a weird obsession over the past few weeks, checking every day, looking for cards. You know, it was like the holy grail, convinced that somebody somewhere must have a card or have made a card or an alternative. AliExpress didn't even have any of them. it's a mystery. Thanks for watching. Goodbye.
All my friends are synths.